The sun hung low over the horizon, bleeding deep orange and crimson hues into the sprawling Texas sky. The roar of a motorcycle engine cut through the stillness of the deserted highway like a steady heartbeat, a fitting soundtrack for Logan Carter, a rugged motorcyclist with years of road behind him. He was a man defined by the freedom of open roads and the camaraderie of the biker brotherhood. But tonight, the horizon ahead offered no answers to the troubles that lingered in his mind. Logan had been riding for hours, his leather jacket flapping against the wind, the faint hum of classic rock buzzing through his helmet speakers. Riding wasn't just a pastime, it was an escape. Life had been cruel in recent years, failed relationships, a crumbling family bond, and a few haunting mistakes had left scars deeper than the ones on his knuckles. The road, though empty and endless, was his only refuge. As the sun dipped further, casting long shadows over the asphalt, something ahead caught Logan's eye. A vehicle's red and blue lights flashed faintly in the distance, a lone patrol car, oddly parked at an angle on the gravel shoulder. His first instinct was to pass by without a second glance. He had little love for authority, especially the kind that wore badges. But something about the scene didn't sit right. The patrol car wasn't pulled over for a traffic stop. It was angled as though it had been abandoned in haste. Slowing his Harley to a purr, Logan pulled over to the opposite shoulder, curiosity overtaking his usual indifference. He killed the engine and removed his helmet, allowing the cool evening air to brush against his scruffy face. Across the road, silhouetted against the dimming light, a figure moved with tense, jerky motions. Officer Redmond, a stout man in a crisp uniform, crouched over a trembling German shepherd, yanking its leash violently while muttering curses that carried on the wind. Logan squinted, his brows furrowing as he took in the unsettling scene. The dog, a large shepherd with a coat of dark sable, whimpered and flinched under Redmond's grip. Its ribs were visible beneath its fur, and its eyes, wide with fear, darted between the officer and the open road, as if calculating an escape. Logan's gut twisted. "What the hell is this guy doing?" Logan muttered under his breath. He debated whether to get involved. Years of riding with the Brotherhood had taught him one golden rule: mind your own business. But something about the dog's helplessness, the blatant cruelty in Redmond's actions, lit a fire in Logan's chest. He wasn't the type to let injustice slide, especially when the victim couldn't defend itself. Logan pushed the kickstand down, his boots crunching against gravel as he approached. "Hey!" he called out, his deep voice cutting through the stillness. Redmond froze, his grip tightening on the leash as he turned his head toward Logan. His expression shifted from surprise to irritation, his jaw clenching as he straightened up. "Nothing to see here, pal. Keep moving," Redmond barked, his tone as sharp as the baton on his belt. Logan stopped a few feet away, his stance firm. "Doesn't look like nothing. That dog's scared out of its mind, and you're not helping." The officer's face reddened, a vein bulging at his temple. "This is police business. You don't want to make it yours." The shepherd whimpered again, its body trembling as it attempted to pull away from Redmond's hold. Logan's eyes met the dog's, and in that brief moment he saw something that struck a chord. Pure desperation, a silent plea for help. "I don't know what kind of cop you are," Logan said, his voice low but steady. "But whatever you're doing, it sure as hell isn't right." Redmond took a threatening step forward, his hand hovering near the baton on his belt. "Back off, or you'll regret it." Before Logan could respond, the dog made its move. With a sudden burst of energy, it jerked its head to the side, slipping free of the loose collar around its neck. Redmond cursed loudly, lunging to grab the animal, but the shepherd was too quick. It darted away, its paws skidding against the gravel, and bolted straight toward Logan. Instinctively, Logan dropped to one knee, arms outstretched. The dog slowed as it approached, panting heavily, its wide eyes locked onto him. Without hesitation, it pressed its trembling body against Logan's chest, seeking refuge. Logan wrapped his arms around the dog, feeling its rapid heartbeat against his own. "Easy, boy. I got you," Logan whispered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Redmond's face twisted in rage as he stomped toward them. "Hand over that dog now! It's a police asset!" Logan rose to his feet, keeping one hand on the dog's back. "Asset? Looks more like a victim to me." "This isn't a negotiation," Redmond snarled, reaching for his baton. "You're interfering with law enforcement." Logan's jaw tightened. He wasn't armed, but he didn't need a weapon to stand his ground. Years of riding with rough bikers had taught him how to handle men like Redmond. But with the dog trembling against him, Logan knew a fight wasn't the answer. He had to think fast. "Sorry, officer," Logan said, his voice dripping with defiance, "but this one's coming with me." Before Redmond could react, Logan scooped the dog into his arms and sprinted back to his Harley. The shepherd squirmed briefly before settling into his hold, its trust in Logan outweighing its fear. Redmond shouted something unintelligible, but Logan didn't stop to listen. He swung his leg over the bike, revved the engine to life, and roared back onto the highway. The shepherd clung to him, its claws digging into his jacket as they sped away into the twilight. The road blurred beneath them as Logan pushed the bike to its limits, the wind whipping past his face. His heart pounded, not just from the thrill of the escape, but from the weight of what he'd just done. Taking a dog from a cop, even a corrupt one, wasn't exactly legal, but Logan didn't care. He'd seen enough to know that leaving the dog with Redmond would have been a death sentence. As the flashing lights of Redmond's patrol car faded into the distance, Logan allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He glanced down at the dog, which had nestled its head against his chest, its breathing beginning to slow. "You're safe now," Logan murmured, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. "I don't know what kind of hell you've been through, but I promise you, it's over." The shepherd didn't respond, but its tail thumped weakly against Logan's arm, a small, silent gesture of gratitude. Logan's grip on the handlebars tightened as the highway stretched endlessly before him. He had no idea what kind of trouble he had just stepped into. But one thing was certain, he wasn't about to let anyone hurt this dog again. And so, with the dog he would soon name Shadow by his side, Logan Carter's journey took an unexpected turn, one that would test not only his courage, but also his resolve to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The evening air was crisp, the kind that hinted at an oncoming chill as the sun fully disappeared beyond the horizon. Logan Carter's Harley-Davidson rolled into the dimly lit lot of a roadside gas station, its engine echoing off the concrete canopy above. The faint fluorescent hum of overhead lights competed with the low purr of the bike. Shadow, the shepherd he'd impulsively rescued, sat awkwardly in the passenger space Logan had hastily rigged with an old blanket from his saddlebag. Logan dismounted, his boots clinking against the asphalt, and glanced at the dog. Shadow was silent, but visibly shaken, his ribs heaving with shallow breaths. The faint tremble in the shepherd's legs hadn't subsided since they had fled Officer Redmond's wrath. Logan crouched, meeting the dog's wide amber eyes. "You've been through hell, haven't you, boy?" Logan muttered, brushing a hand over Shadow's matted fur. His fingers brushed a raw patch on the dog's neck, where the collar had dug into the skin, leaving a ring of irritated flesh. Shadow flinched, but didn't pull away completely. "Hang tight," Logan said. "We'll get you cleaned up." He stood, his gaze scanning the station. There were no other vehicles parked, save for an old rusted sedan by the dumpster. The store looked run down but open, its neon sign flickering in protest against years of neglect. Logan grabbed his wallet from his jacket pocket and headed inside. The clerk behind the counter, a kid who couldn't have been older than 19, eyed Logan with suspicion. Logan was used to the looks. The leather jacket, road-worn jeans, and biker boots often gave people the wrong impression. He ignored it and headed straight for the back aisle, grabbing a few bottles of water, a roll of gauze, and a pack of dog food. As he approached the counter, the clerk's eyes darted to the parking lot, lingering on Shadow. "That your dog?" the clerk asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. "For now," Logan replied curtly, placing the items on the counter. The transaction was silent, save for the beeping of the register. Logan paid, gathered the supplies, and walked back out to the bike. Shadow's ears perked up slightly as Logan approached, though the dog remained seated. "Let's see what we're dealing with," Logan said, kneeling next to the dog. He poured water onto a rag and gently cleaned the raw patch on Shadow's neck. The dog whimpered but allowed him to work, its trust in Logan growing incrementally. As Logan cleaned, he noticed other scars hidden beneath the fur. Thin, deliberate marks that spoke of past abuse. "What did they do to you, huh?" Logan muttered, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. He was so focused on tending to Shadow that he didn't hear the approaching footsteps until they were close. "Nice dog," came a gravelly voice from behind him. Logan spun around, instinctively placing himself between Shadow and the newcomer. A man stood a few feet away, his frame wiry but sturdy, dressed in layers of mismatched clothes that hinted at long nights on the road. His face was weathered, framed by a scraggly beard, and his eyes held a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Didn't mean to spook you," the man said, raising his hand slightly in a gesture of peace. "Name's Sam. Saw you pull in." Logan relaxed slightly but didn't drop his guard. "Logan," he replied, "what can I do for you, Sam?" Sam gestured toward Shadow. "That's a fine shepherd you got there, but he looks like he's been through the ringer. Where'd you find him?" Logan hesitated, unsure how much to share. After a brief pause, he said, "Let's just say I rescued him from a bad situation." Sam nodded knowingly. "Yeah, I've seen that look before. That ain't no ordinary stray, though. Dogs like that, they don't end up on the streets by accident." Logan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Sam crouched down, his eyes studying Shadow with a practiced gaze. "You see the way he's sitting? Head low, like he's bracing for something? That's a dog that's been trained rough. Too rough. Probably used to belong to someone who didn't give a damn about him." Logan didn't respond, but the unease in his gut deepened. Sam continued, his voice lowering. "You ever heard of the stuff going on at Ravenwood? The docks, just a couple hours south of here?" Logan shook his head. "Can't say I have." "Well," Sam said, leaning closer, "word is there's some bad folks running things down there. Smugglers, drug runners, you name it. And they've got themselves a little trick, using dogs like this one for their dirty work. Guarding shipments, scaring off competition, sniffing out stashes." Logan glanced at Shadow, who was now lying down with his head resting on his paws. The dog's scars and behavior suddenly seemed to align with Sam's grim description. "You think he was one of theirs?" Logan asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. Sam shrugged. "Could be. But if that's the case, you're lucky to have him alive. Dogs like that, they're usually disposable. When they've outlived their usefulness, well..." Sam's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Logan felt a surge of protectiveness toward Shadow. He looked down at the dog, who gazed back at him with tired but trusting eyes. "So what do I do now?" Logan asked, more to himself than to Sam. Sam scratched his beard. "If I were you, I'd be careful. If he was theirs, they're not going to be too happy about losing him. And if you really want answers, Ravenwood's where you'll find them. Just don't go alone." Logan stood, his mind racing. He didn't know much about Ravenwood, but he'd heard enough to know it wasn't the kind of place you visited casually. Still, if Shadow had been part of something bigger, something darker, Logan couldn't just walk away. He owed it to the dog, and maybe to himself, to uncover the truth. "Thanks for the heads up," Logan said, extending a hand. Sam shook it firmly. "Good luck, Logan. You're gonna need it." As Sam wandered back toward the dumpster, Logan turned his attention to Shadow. "Looks like we've got some digging to do, buddy," he said, his voice soft but resolute. Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of Logan's voice, and for the first time since they'd met, the dog's tail gave a faint wag. Logan smiled, though his thoughts were anything but light. He didn't know what he was getting into, but one thing was clear. The journey he'd started on that lonely highway was far from over. The sun had just begun to rise over the horizon as Logan Carter parked his Harley outside a small roadside diner on the outskirts of Iron Creek. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed against the faint chirping of morning birds, but Logan barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, running circles around what Sam had told him the night before. Shadow, now sitting patiently beside the motorcycle, seemed calmer, but his wary glances and occasional shudders made it clear he wasn't fully at ease. Logan checked his phone again, scanning the message from Lila Warren, a journalist friend he hadn't spoken to in years. She'd always had a knack for uncovering stories buried under layers of corruption, and when he had called her late last night to talk about Shadow, she immediately mentioned someone she thought could help. "Meet him at the diner on Route 17. Don't ask too many questions up front," the message had read. Logan shoved the phone into his jacket pocket and glanced at Shadow. "Well, boy," he muttered, "let's see if this guy can give us some answers." The diner's interior smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs, the kind of comforting yet overwhelming scent that only existed in roadside stops like this one. Logan scanned the room, his eyes landing on a man seated in a corner booth. He was dressed plainly, jeans, a flannel shirt, and a weathered leather jacket, but the sharpness in his eyes and the rigid posture set him apart. This wasn't an ordinary trucker stopping for breakfast. The man nodded subtly at Logan, gesturing for him to come over. Logan took a breath, signaled for Shadow to stay by the door, and walked to the booth. "You Carter?" the man asked, his voice low but firm. "Logan," he confirmed, sliding into the booth across from him. "And you must be Caleb Stone." Stone gave a curt nod. His eyes flickered briefly to the door, where Shadow waited. "That the dog?" Logan tensed. "Yeah, why?" "Because if it's the dog I think it is, you're sitting on a live grenade," Stone replied, leaning forward. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Logan hesitated, studying the man in front of him. Something about Stone's demeanor was disarming. Not overly friendly, but genuine enough to make Logan feel he could trust him. Slowly, Logan recounted the events of the last 2 days. The encounter with Officer Redmond, Shadow's escape, the scars, and Sam's cryptic warning about the docks at Ravenwood. Stone listened intently, his face unreadable, but the occasional twitch of his jaw revealed his mounting frustration. When Logan finished, Stone leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You've gotten yourself into something big," he said finally, "and dangerous." "Yeah, I figured that much," Logan shot back. "What I don't know is why. What's so special about this dog?" Stone leaned forward again, lowering his voice. "That dog, Shadow, was part of an off-the-books program run by some dirty cops and smugglers. They use unregistered K9S like him for everything, sniffing out rival shipments, intimidating witnesses, even guarding stash houses. But the worst part? These dogs are disposable to them. When they've outlived their usefulness, they're either dumped or put down." Logan felt his fists clench under the table. He glanced back at Shadow, who sat obediently by the door, his head tilted slightly as if sensing the tension in the room. Stone continued, his tone grave. "We've been investigating this network for over a year. It runs deep, Carter. Local law enforcement, port officials, even some private contractors. But we've been hitting walls because they've got people on the inside feeding them our moves." "Inside the FBI?" Logan asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Stone nodded. "Yeah. That's why this dog is so important. Shadow is a living piece of evidence. If we can connect him to one of their operations, say the docks at Ravenwood, it could blow the whole thing wide open." Logan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "So, you're telling me that by rescuing this dog, I've put a target on my back?" "Pretty much," Stone said bluntly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The clatter of plates and low chatter from other diners filled the silence between them. Finally, Logan broke it. "So, what's the plan?" Stone smirked faintly. "You're not exactly the stay-on-the-sidelines type, are you?" "Never have been," Logan replied. "Good," Stone said, "because I need your help." Logan raised an eyebrow. "My help? I'm a biker, not a cop." Stone shook his head. "You're someone who cares about that dog, and right now, he needs you. Look, we're stretched thin, and I can't move Shadow into protective custody without tipping off the wrong people. But if you're willing to stick your neck out, I can guide you through this. Together, we can gather what we need to shut these bastards down." Logan considered the offer, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. He looked back at Shadow again. The dog, now lying down, looked calmer than he'd seen him yet, as if sensing that he was finally safe. "All right," Logan said after a long pause. "I'm in, but on one condition." "What's that?" Stone asked. "If things go south, I'm not letting anything happen to that dog," Logan said firmly. "Shadow comes first." Stone's expression softened, and he nodded. "Deal." As they finalized their plan, Stone pulled out a tablet and opened a series of files. He showed Logan photos of the docks at Ravenwood, highlighting key locations where shipments were often moved under the radar. He also shared details about Officer Redmond and others suspected to be involved, including a shadowy figure named Marcus Hale, who Stone suspected was the mole within the FBI. "Hale's dangerous," Stone warned. "If he finds out you're helping us, he won't hesitate to take you out." "Noted," Logan replied, his jaw tightening. Before they parted ways, Stone handed Logan a burner phone. "This is how we'll stay in touch. Keep it charged and close. And Carter..." "Yeah?" "Be careful. These people don't play fair." Logan nodded, pocketing the phone. As he stepped outside, Shadow immediately perked up, his tail wagging faintly. Logan crouched down, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Looks like we've got some work to do, buddy," Logan said. Shadow responded with a quiet huff, leaning into Logan's touch. As Logan mounted his bike and pulled back onto the road, the weight of what he'd just agreed to began to sink in. This wasn't just about Shadow anymore. It was about justice, about exposing the corruption that had allowed people like Redmond to thrive. But deep down, Logan knew one thing for certain. No matter how dangerous things got, he wasn't going to let Shadow down. The night sky above Ravenwood docks was cloaked in thick clouds, obscuring the faint light of the crescent moon. The salty tang of the ocean breeze mixed with the metallic scent of rusted shipping containers, stacked like towering monoliths along the sprawling dockyard. In the shadow of the towering cranes, a black SUV crept silently to a stop. Inside, Logan Carter adjusted his leather gloves, his gaze fixed on Shadow, who sat alert in the back seat, ears twitching at every distant clang and creak. "Carter," Agent Caleb Stone said from the driver's seat, his voice calm but sharp. "You ready for this?" Logan nodded, though his stomach churned. "As ready as I'll ever be." Stone handed him a small earpiece. "Stay on comms, follow my lead, and don't wander off. These guys aren't amateurs." Logan inserted the earpiece, feeling the weight of the night's mission settle heavily on his shoulders. Shadow, sensing the tension, let out a low whine. Logan reached back, scratching the shepherd's head. "We've got this, boy," he whispered. Stone tapped his radio. "Team Bravo, in position. Carter and the dog are with me. We move on my signal." A chorus of confirmations came through the line. The small task force of federal agents, armed and armored, was scattered strategically around the dockyard, waiting for the green light. The plan was simple in theory. Infiltrate the dockyard, locate the suspected contraband hidden in Warehouse 17, and secure evidence to connect the smuggling operation to Officer Redmond and his network of corrupt officials. But Stone had made it clear that nothing about Ravenwood was ever simple. Logan followed Stone as they exited the SUV, moving through the maze of containers. Shadow padded silently at Logan's side, his movements precise and deliberate. The training that had once been a tool of abuse now served as their greatest advantage. As they approached the warehouse, Stone raised a fist, signaling the team to halt. He pointed to Shadow, then gestured toward the partially open door. "You're up, Carter," Stone said in a hushed voice. Logan crouched beside Shadow, meeting the dog's intense gaze. "All right, buddy," he murmured. "Do your thing." Shadow's nose twitched as Logan unclipped his leash. Without hesitation, the shepherd slipped through the gap in the door, his movements nearly invisible in the dim light. Logan and Stone followed, their footsteps muffled against the concrete floor. Inside, the warehouse was a cavernous space filled with towering stacks of crates and pallets. Dim overhead lights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows across the floor. Shadow darted ahead, his nose working furiously as he zigzagged between the stacks. "Keep your eyes open," Stone whispered. "This place could be rigged." Shadow suddenly froze, his body stiffening as he growled low in his throat. Logan's pulse quickened as the dog turned sharply, leading them toward a section of crates marked with faded red paint. Stone signaled to the agents behind them, who moved in to inspect the crates. One of them, a young agent named Mason, pried open the lid of the nearest crate. "Bingo," Mason muttered, revealing a stash of plastic-wrapped bundles. Stone leaned in, inspecting the contents. "Cocaine," he confirmed, "and a lot of it." Another agent opened a second crate, uncovering a cache of unregistered firearms. Stone's jaw tightened. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. Before they could dig further, the sound of a door slamming echoed through the warehouse. "Redmond's here," Logan hissed, recognizing the voice barking orders in the distance. "Stay sharp," Stone ordered, motioning for the team to take cover. The agents fanned out, positioning themselves behind crates and containers. Logan crouched behind a stack of pallets, keeping Shadow close. The dog's ears were pinned back, his body tense. From his vantage point, Logan saw Officer Redmond stride into view, flanked by two men carrying crowbars. Redmond's face was twisted with rage, his eyes scanning the warehouse. "Search every inch of this place," Redmond barked. "We can't let them find the files." Logan's heart raced. Files? He glanced at Stone, who gave him a curt nod. "Move on my signal," Stone whispered into the comms. As Redmond and his men began tearing through crates, Shadow growled softly, his body coiled like a spring. Logan tightened his grip on the dog's leash, silently willing him to stay calm. Suddenly, one of Redmond's men stumbled across a laptop hidden beneath a tarp. "Got it!" the man called out. Redmond's eyes lit up with a mix of relief and fury. "Good. Destroy it. Now." "Now!" Stone's voice snapped through the comms. The agents moved as one, emerging from their hiding spots with weapons drawn. "Freeze! FBI!" Chaos erupted. Redmond's men dropped the laptop and reached for their weapons, but the agents were faster. Gunfire cracked through the air, the sharp reports echoing off the walls. Logan ducked, pulling Shadow behind cover. He watched as the agents engaged Redmond's crew, their training and precision overwhelming the smugglers. Redmond, however, wasn't going down without a fight. The officer grabbed a metal rod from a nearby crate and swung wildly, knocking one of the agents to the ground. Logan's instincts kicked in. "Shadow, go!" he commanded. The shepherd launched forward, a blur of fur and muscle. He collided with Redmond, knocking the rod from his hands and pinning him to the ground. Redmond struggled, but Shadow's jaws closed around his arm, forcing him into submission. "Get him off me!" Redmond screamed, his voice tinged with panic. Logan approached cautiously, pulling Shadow back with a firm tug on his leash. The dog obeyed, his teeth releasing their grip, but his growl rumbling like distant thunder. Stone moved in, slapping cuffs on Redmond and hauling him to his feet. "You're done, Redmond," Stone said coldly. Redmond sneered, blood dripping from his arm. "You think this changes anything? You have no idea how deep this goes." Stone's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." As the agents secured the scene, Logan and Shadow explored the back of the warehouse. In a hidden compartment beneath a stack of crates, they found a locked safe. "Stone," Logan called out. Stone approached, inspecting the safe. "Mason, get the tools!" Minutes later, the safe was cracked open, revealing a trove of documents and digital drives. Stone's expression darkened as he skimmed the contents. "This isn't just Redmond," he muttered. "This goes all the way up the chain. There are names here. Big names." Logan frowned. "How big?" Stone didn't answer immediately. He looked at Logan, his face grim. "Big enough that we just became targets." The team worked through the night, cataloging evidence and loading it into secure transport vehicles. Shadow, now exhausted but calm, lay at Logan's feet, his eyes half closed. As Logan watched the agents move, a sense of unease settled over him. They'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. Redmond's words echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder that their fight had only just begun. Logan knelt beside Shadow, running a hand over the dog's fur. "You did good, buddy," he said softly. Shadow thumped his tail weakly, his trust in Logan unshaken. And so, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Logan and Shadow prepared to face the storm that was sure to follow. The warehouse was quiet now, its chaos subdued. Redmond and his men were in custody, the evidence had been secured, and the team of federal agents worked efficiently to wrap up the operation. Logan stood near Shadow, who rested on the cold concrete floor, his sides rising and falling steadily as he tried to recover from the adrenaline-fueled raid. The air was heavy with the scent of gunpowder and salt, a grim reminder of the fight they had just endured. Agent Caleb Stone approached, his expression calm, but his posture tense. "We've got what we need to blow this wide open," he said, his voice low, "but we're not in the clear yet. Let's stay sharp." Logan nodded, glancing at Shadow. "He held up better than I expected," Logan said, his tone proud but laced with concern. "But I need to get him checked out soon. He took a hit during the fight." Stone crouched beside the dog, his hand hovering over Shadow's head in silent approval. "He's tough. He's seen worse, no doubt. We'll get him to safety once this is over." As Stone stood, his radio crackled with static. "Stone, this is Mason. We've got a situation near the dock entrance. Could use your eyes." Stone frowned and tapped his radio. "On my way. Carter, stay here and keep an eye on Shadow." Logan gave a quick nod as Stone and a few other agents headed toward the front of the warehouse. The tension eased slightly, leaving Logan and Shadow alone in the cavernous space. For the first time that night, Logan felt like he could breathe. But the reprieve was short-lived. The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, sharp and deliberate. Logan turned, expecting to see Stone or another agent returning, Instead, Agent Marcus Hale emerged from the shadows, his face unreadable, his hand resting on the holster at his side. "Hale," Logan said, his voice steady but cautious. "What are you doing back here? Thought you were helping with transport." Hale smiled faintly, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Just tying up some loose ends." Logan's gut twisted. There was something off about the way Hale moved, the way his gaze lingered on Shadow. The shepherd seemed to sense it too, his ears flattening and a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You're awfully protective of that dog," Hale said, his tone casual but edged with something darker. Logan took a step closer to Shadow, his instincts flaring. "Yeah, well, he's earned it. Why?" Hale's hand moved to his holster, and Logan's heart dropped. "Because that dog is the last thing standing between us and the truth." Hale moved fast, drawing his weapon and pointing it at Shadow. Logan's reaction was instant. He lunged forward, grabbing the nearest object, a metal pipe, and swung it toward Hale. The agent sidestepped, but the motion disrupted his aim, and the shot went wide, ricocheting off a nearby crate. Shadow sprang to his feet, barking ferociously. Hale cursed and aimed again, but Logan tackled him, the two men crashing to the floor in a chaotic struggle. Hale was strong, but Logan's years on the road had given him a raw, scrappy edge. He threw a punch, catching Hale in the jaw, but the agent retaliated with a sharp elbow to Logan's ribs, forcing him back. Shadow, sensing Logan's distress, lunged at Hale, teeth bared. The shepherd latched onto Hale's arm, causing the man to cry out in pain. With a vicious shake, Shadow forced Hale to drop his weapon, but not before Hale managed to grab a knife from his belt. The blade flashed in the dim light, and Logan's stomach sank as Hale slashed at Shadow, catching the dog's side. Shadow yelped and released his grip, staggering backward as blood began to seep into his fur. "Shadow!" Logan shouted, his voice a mix of fury and panic. Using the distraction, Hale scrambled to his feet, clutching his injured arm. He glared at Logan, his face twisted with frustration. "You have no idea what you're messing with, Carter," he spat. "This goes so much deeper than you can imagine." Logan took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Then why don't you enlighten me?" Hale smirked, backing toward the shadows. "Sorry, but that's not part of the plan." With that, he bolted, disappearing into the maze of crates and containers. Logan started after him but stopped when Shadow let out a weak whine. Logan dropped to his knees beside the dog, his hands trembling as he examined the wound. It wasn't deep, but it bled steadily, staining Shadow's sable fur. "Hang in there, buddy," Logan murmured, his voice cracking. "You're tougher than this." He tore a strip of fabric from his shirt, pressing it against the wound to slow the bleeding. Shadow flinched but didn't resist, his trust in Logan unwavering. Moments later, Stone and the other agents burst into the room, weapons drawn. "What happened?" Stone demanded, his eyes darting between Logan and the injured dog. "Hale," Logan said through gritted teeth. "He turned on us, tried to kill Shadow and ran when I stopped him." Stone's face darkened. "Damn it, I had a feeling about him." Logan stood, cradling Shadow carefully in his arms. "We need to get him to a vet. Now." Stone nodded. "There's a vet we trust on the outskirts of town. Low profile. I'll take you there." The ride to the vet was tense and silent, the only sound the soft whimpering of Shadow in Logan's arms. The clinic was small and unassuming, nestled between a mechanic's shop and a laundromat. A middle-aged woman in scrubs greeted them, her sharp eyes taking in the situation immediately. "Bring him in," she said, her tone brisk but kind. Logan followed her into a small examination room, setting Shadow gently on the table. The vet worked quickly, cleaning and stitching the wound with practiced efficiency. "He's lucky," she said, glancing at Logan. "Another inch and that knife would have hit something vital." Logan exhaled, relief washing over him like a wave. "Thank you." The vet nodded. "He'll need rest, but he'll pull through." As they left the clinic, Stone handed Logan a burner phone. "You need to be extra careful now," Stone said. "If Hale's gone rogue, he'll come after you, and he won't stop until that dog is out of the picture." Logan pocketed the phone, his jaw tightening. Let him try. Hours later, as Logan sat in a dingy motel room with Shadow resting at his feet, his own phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. "This isn't over, Carter. You'll pay for getting in my way." Logan stared at the message, his grip tightening on the phone. He looked down at Shadow, who opened one eye and wagged his tail weakly. "Don't worry, boy," Logan said quietly. "We'll get through this, together." As the night deepened, Logan resolved to see this fight through, no matter the cost. Hale had made it personal, and Logan wasn't about to back down. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with whispers and subdued tension. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras poised to capture every moment. Lawyers shuffled papers on their desks, and a few members of the public, curious about the high-profile corruption case, leaned forward eagerly in their seats. At the center of it all sat Logan Carter, his worn leather jacket traded for a simple button-up shirt. His eyes were steady but sharp, scanning the room like a seasoned rider, assessing an unfamiliar road. Beside him, Shadow lay on the floor, his head resting on his paws, calm but alert. This wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. Months of investigations, raids, and near-deadly encounters had led to this moment. Corrupt officers like Redmond and their conspirators were finally facing justice for their crimes. But Logan couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over yet. Not while Marcus Hale was still in play. The proceedings began with the prosecutor, Laura Hastings, laying out the case. Her words were precise and cutting, each statement a brick in the wall of evidence against Redmond and his co-conspirators. She outlined their illicit operations, the use of unregistered K-9 units like Shadow to guard smuggling routes, the abuse of police authority to protect illegal shipments, and the ties to organized crime. Logan listened carefully, his jaw tightening as Hastings described the role Shadow had likely played in these operations. Though the dog had been a victim, his involvement was crucial in exposing the corruption. Hastings gestured toward Shadow, who lifted his head slightly at the attention. "This dog," Hastings said, her voice rising, "is not only a survivor of horrific abuse, but also a living piece of evidence. His scars, both physical and behavioral, tell the story of a system corrupted by greed and cruelty." Logan reached down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. The shepherd responded with a soft huff, his trust in Logan unwavering. When Logan was called to the stand, the room fell silent. As he took his oath and seated himself, he felt dozens of eyes on him, some supportive, others skeptical. The defense lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Raymond Cole, watched Logan with a predatory gleam, ready to pounce on any perceived weakness. The prosecutor began. "Mr. Carter, can you recount the events that led to your discovery of Shadow and your involvement in this case?" Logan leaned into the microphone, his voice steady. He described the lonely highway where he first saw Redmond abusing Shadow, the chaotic raid at Ravenwood, and the betrayal by Marcus Hale. His words were raw and unembellished, each one cutting through the courtroom's quiet. When he described Shadow's bravery during the raid, how the shepherd had risked his life to protect the team, several people in the gallery murmured in sympathy. But then came the cross-examination. Cole stood, straightening his tie as he approached the stand. "Mr. Carter," Cole began smoothly, "you're a motorcyclist, correct? Part of a group that, shall we say, doesn't always respect the law." Logan raised an eyebrow. "I ride motorcycles, yeah, but I'm not here for a lecture on traffic laws." A ripple of laughter passed through the gallery, but Cole pressed on. "And yet, you took it upon yourself to interfere in a police operation, assault an officer, and steal a K-9 unit. Isn't that correct?" Logan's eyes narrowed. "I saved a dog from being abused. If you call that interference, then yeah, I did." Cole smirked, but before he could continue, Hastings interrupted. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense is attempting to discredit a key witness without addressing the facts of the case." The judge, an older man with a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded. "Sustained. Mr. Cole, move on." As the day wore on, more evidence was presented. Video footage from the Ravenwood raid played on a large screen, showing crates filled with contraband and Redmond shouting orders to his men. A particularly damning clip captured Redmond threatening to destroy the files that later revealed the scope of the corruption. But the most compelling moment came when Shadow was called forward. Hastings explained how the dog's injuries and behavioral patterns matched the methods used by the corrupt officers to train and exploit K-9 units. A veterinarian who had examined Shadow after the raid testified about the scars on his body and the psychological trauma he'd endured. "This dog's resilience is extraordinary," she said, "but the evidence of abuse is undeniable." Shadow sat obediently at Logan's side throughout the testimony, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the gravity of the accusations. Then, just as the prosecution's case seemed airtight, the courtroom doors opened and Marcus Hale entered. Dressed sharply and exuding false confidence, he walked to the defense table, nodding at Redmond. Logan's stomach churned. Hale was called to testify as a defense witness, but his purpose was clear: to muddy the waters. He spoke with calculated precision, painting a picture of a disorganized investigation and misunderstandings about the use of K-9 units. But Hastings was ready. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she pulled no punches. "Agent Hale," she began, her tone icy, "you claim the investigation was flawed, yet your name appears in several documents linked to the Ravenwood operation. Can you explain that?" Hale's composure faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "Those documents were fabricated. I had no involvement." Hastings didn't relent. She brought up inconsistencies in Hale's testimony and highlighted his failure to report key evidence during the investigation. Finally, she played a hidden camera video captured during the Ravenwood raid, a video that showed Hale attempting to destroy files while the agents were preoccupied. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Hale's face turned ashen. By the end of the day, the weight of the evidence was impossible to ignore. The judge adjourned the trial briefly before returning with a verdict. Redmond and several other officers were found guilty on multiple counts, including abuse of power, conspiracy, and smuggling. Hale was taken into custody on charges of obstruction of justice and aiding and abetting criminal activity. As the defendants were led away in cuffs, Logan felt a strange mix of relief and lingering unease. Justice had been served, but the fight wasn't over. There were still names on those files, powerful names that hadn't yet faced the consequences. That evening, Logan and Shadow sat outside the courthouse, watching the sunset. Stone joined them, his expression weary but satisfied. "You did good today, Carter," Stone said, clapping Logan on the shoulder. Logan nodded, glancing down at Shadow. "He's the real hero," he said. Stone smiled faintly. "You both are. But don't let your guard down. Hale's allies won't be happy about this." Logan sighed, his hand resting on Shadow's head. "Yeah, I figured as much, but we'll handle it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a golden glow, Logan felt a quiet resolve settle over him. Shadow wagged his tail, leaning into Logan's side as if to say, "We've got this." The house sat at the edge of a quiet suburb, where wide streets curved between clusters of neatly trimmed lawns and picket fences. It wasn't much, just a modest single-story home with peeling paint and a few creaky porch steps. But it was a sanctuary compared to the chaos Logan Carter had lived through. Shadow lay sprawled on the porch, soaking in the late afternoon sun. His fur was clean and glossy now, and the scars that once told a story of abuse had begun to fade beneath the care Logan had given him. The shepherd's eyes followed Logan as he worked on the old Harley parked in the driveway. "You're getting spoiled," Logan muttered with a smirk, tossing Shadow a piece of jerky. The dog caught it midair and thumped his tail in appreciation. Logan leaned back, wiping grease from his hands, and allowed himself a moment of peace. For the first time in months, the world felt still. No gunfire, no tense interrogations, no covert missions. Just the sound of birds and the occasional distant hum of traffic. But even as Logan settled into this new life, a sense of unease lingered. It started small, a prickling at the back of his neck when he stepped outside, the nagging feeling of being watched. Then he noticed it. A dark sedan parked at the corner of his street. The first time, Logan thought nothing of it. But when the car appeared again the next day, and the day after that, always at odd hours, his instincts flared. Shadow noticed too. The shepherd's ears perked up whenever the car was near, and his growl was low but unmistakable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Logan stood at the edge of his yard, arms crossed, staring at the sedan. The windows were tinted, revealing nothing of the driver or their intentions. But Logan didn't need to see inside to know. Someone was watching him. "Looks like the past isn't done with us yet, buddy," Logan muttered, glancing down at Shadow. The dog let out a soft huff, his tail wagging once, as if to say, "We're ready." Logan's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter later that night. It was a text from Stone. "Intel suggests Hale's allies may still be active. Watch your back." Logan stared at the message, his jaw tightening. He'd expected this. Taking down Redmond and his crew was only the tip of the iceberg. The files recovered at Ravenwood had exposed a sprawling network, and while many of its members were behind bars, others had gone underground. Shadow trotted into the kitchen, his nails clicking softly against the tile. Logan crouched to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Guess we're not retiring just yet," he said with a wry smile. The next morning, Logan made a call to Stone. "I need to know how bad it is," Logan said. Stone's voice was calm but serious. "Bad enough. There are whispers about retaliation. They lost a lot when we took Ravenwood, and they know you played a part. Keep a low profile, Carter, and keep Shadow close." Logan hung up and stared out the window. The sedan wasn't there today, but that didn't mean the threat was gone. Determined to protect what little peace he'd found, Logan took precautions. He reinforced the locks on his doors and installed cameras around the property. At night, he kept a loaded shotgun within reach and Shadow at his side. The dog's sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty were the only security system Logan truly trusted. Despite the precautions, life continued. Logan found a rhythm in his quiet neighborhood. He struck up casual conversations with his neighbors, helped an elderly woman repair her fence, and even started attending a local coffee shop that served the best black coffee he'd ever tasted. Through it all, Shadow remained his constant companion. Whether on long walks through the nearby trails or quiet evenings on the porch, the shepherd was always there, a reminder of both the battles they'd fought and the bond they now shared. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Logan clipped a leash onto Shadow's collar. "Come on, boy," he said. "Let's stretch our legs." They walked in comfortable silence, the neighborhood bathed in the warm glow of twilight. The air was cool, and the faint scent of blooming flowers lingered. Logan felt the weight of his unease lift slightly, replaced by the steady rhythm of Shadow's paws on the pavement. As they turned down a quiet street, Logan caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision. His heart jumped. But when he turned, it was just a neighbor stepping out to retrieve their mail. Still, the reminder was clear. The past might have faded into the background, but it hadn't disappeared completely. They stopped at a small park near the edge of the neighborhood. Shadow sniffed around the base of a tree, while Logan leaned against a bench, watching the last light of day slip below the horizon. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Logan said softly, glancing at Shadow. The dog looked up, his amber eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. Logan smiled faintly. "Me too." For the first time in a long while, Logan allowed himself to hope. Maybe the worst was behind them. Maybe the threats would fade, the shadows retreating into the past where they belonged. But even as the thought crossed his mind, Logan knew he couldn't fully let his guard down. The scars on Shadow's body and the memories of their battles were reminders of what they'd survived, and what might still come. As the stars began to emerge, Logan and Shadow started the walk back home. The night air was cool against Logan's skin, and the distant sound of crickets filled the silence. Shadow walked close, his head held high, his tail swishing gently with each step. At the end of the road, Logan paused, glancing back at the quiet street behind them. For now, there was no dark sedan, no lurking figures, just the peace of a suburban evening. Logan knelt beside Shadow, running a hand over the shepherd's fur. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Shadow responded with a soft bark, his tail wagging. Logan stood, his gaze fixed on the horizon ahead. "Whatever comes next," he said, his voice low but resolute, "we'll face it. Together." As they stepped back onto their porch, the warm glow of the porch light illuminating their path, Logan felt the weight of both the past and the future settle into balance. The fight wasn't over, but for now, there was peace. And in the quiet of that moment, with Shadow at his side, Logan dared to believe that they had found something worth protecting.